Hi, everyone, and welcome to our very first roundtable for the I've Got Your Back book. This is a book co-authored by myself, Emily May, the co-founder and executive director here at Right to Be, alongside my co-visionary, co-conspirator, deputy director, Jorge Arteaga. Welcome, Jorge. We are so excited. This is our first one of these. The book launched on May 10th, and we're out here talking to our partners. This book would not have been possible without our incredible partners, and we're excited to kick off today with some of our amazing partners, Asian Americans Advancing Justice. We've got representatives here from the teams in DC, LA, and Chicago, as well as CAIR. So I'm going to pass it over to Jorge to introduce the team.
Thanks, Emily. So welcome, y'all. Welcome. Today we have with us Cristina Yang, representing Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA. We have Sangini Brahmbhatt, representing Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago. And we have Sufyan Sohel with us, representing CAIR-Chicago. Thank you for being with us today, y'all.
Thanks so much for being with us. So I'm going to kick it off with a question for all of you. So before this, we sent you all a copy of the book in the mail. And before you even opened it, was there something in here that you, as now experts in bystander intervention, were excited about learning? Or did you feel like, I've got this, I know it all, I'm just excited to see it in print?
I could kick it off. This is Sangini. I was just very excited to actually hold the physical book. I think after, we've been partnering with Right to Be, formerly Hollaback, for coming up to 2 years. So I was most excited to read to see if there were any new resources. I know this was just kind of written, but because we're continuously seeing acts of harassment and violence, just seeing what else can I learn by reading it versus being on Zoom. So but having a physical print version felt so good to just be in my hands and get to reading.
Love it.
Yeah, I think for me, similarly, I feel like feels like we can do the bystander 60-minute training in our sleep, perhaps, which is a wonderful thing. But of course, there's a lot more there than we can cover in that short 60 minutes together. And so just having an opportunity to take a deeper dive into the content, and I think through the book to learn more about Emily and Jorge and their personal connection to, really devoting their time and energy to this important work. I think that's been a really great aspect of the book as well.
Totally agree with everything that was said. Loved it. I thought I knew everything about it, but after reading it, I learned more and more, and diving deeper into the 5Ds and the background was it's a great refresher, and I feel I've learned more and more about it. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
I'm glad y'all enjoyed it. I mean, I wrote the thing, and I still feel like when I got it, I was excited to read, because I'm Emily and I spent so much time on it, but I was joking with Cristina before I was like, it's people are gonna want me to actually talk about this thing, huh? Right? It was, you're constantly swimming in it. So to me, it's just this is just another day at work. I was like, no, you wrote a whole book, you have to talk about it. But glad that y'all are enjoying it. And so that takes me to our next question, which is, one is we're grateful for y'all. You all took a leap to partner with us and bring bystander intervention to your communities. Oh, and just very quick, I want to shout out, we have Marita Etcubanez from Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, joining us, DC. Marita, you want to say what's up real quick before I dive into this question?
Yeah, hi everyone. So sorry to be joining late. I'm actually coming in from a training, so that's my excuse.
That's the best one ever. That's the best one ever.
Marita was the original partner,
Yeah.
and how we met all of these other amazing folks. So we are so excited to have you in whatever form we can get you in. Thanks so much for coming, Marita.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, y'all took a leap of faith to partner with us and bring bystander intervention to your communities. And so my question to y'all is, why do you think bystander intervention is important to your work? And we can start there. And I guess I'll direct the first question. I'll send it to you, Sufyan.
Thank you for the question. You know, I think all of us see in this world of combating hate faced by our communities, and oftentimes I'm asked, what can we do? How can we support your community? And bystander intervention is such a low-hanging fruit for so many people, for them just to identify and be able to step in and really support those who are experiencing it the way they will need to be and want to be supported. And I feel all 5 Ds are really impactful and effective. And but only one of them, as we've all learned, is the direct one. And all the others are indirect ways that people can actually do something to make the person experiencing hate or harassment feel seen or heard and get the support they need. And when I work with communities and talk with communities outside of those I directly represent and talk about this, they realize, oh my gosh, there is something I can do. And then I'm just grateful for this relationship and being able to present those the Ds for them to use.
Thank you, Sufyan. Y'all want to popcorn it? Everyone want to take a chance at that one, Sufyan? You want to pass it to somebody else?
Sure, Marita, up to you, please.
Wow, there's so much I could say. You know, one of the things I really love about the 5 Ds is that they're practical, they're actionable. I feel like they're tactics that anyone can use to step in and disrupt, stop harassment while keeping themselves and others safe. And I feel like the tactics are incredibly straightforward. And yet I feel like when we're going through the training, we prompt for a lot of people just these light bulb moments, right? Where they are recognizing that these are things they've already used in their regular lives, but they haven't maybe thought about these as tactics, as proactive intervention to stop harassment. So I think that's the beauty of this training. And clearly with our training to address anti-Asian hate and harassment, you know, we came together and started doing this at a moment of real need for the Asian American community. And I know we were pretty overwhelmed with the initial response to our trainings. And here we are 2.5 years later, and unfortunately the need continues. And we're still here doing it. And I mean, I'm confident that we will continue to offer trainings as long as the need exists.
Just to piggyback off of what Marita just shared, I think, you know, for me, beyond what we see coming in through our online hate tracker that we maintain, you know, really nationally across the Advancing Justice Affiliation, as well as calls that we get on our Asian language hotlines, really reflecting that unfortunately there does continue to be a need for bystander intervention training, even though the sort of, I think the mainstream media spotlight has really turned away from anti-Asian hate, you know, save for some really horrific incidents, unfortunately, over the last several months. Feels like there's not as much of that sustained attention, but still, I think the individual stories that we hear reflect that there continues to be a need for it. And I think even in my own life, I'm just thinking literally yesterday, a good friend of mine from law school posted on her Facebook a very personal story of having experienced a anti-Asian act of harassment as she was waiting for an Uber to come outside of a store here in LA, a very liberal, fairly affluent neighborhood where you kind of expect like that would never happen. But, you know, no one intervened in that moment, though some people did use the delay D and checked on her afterwards. But she was definitely in her post sharing just kind of that Monday morning quarterbacking. I think a lot of us do after you've experienced an incident. should I have said something to make it go differently? And so I was able to follow up with her afterwards and definitely employ some of the tactics that I've used in actually delivering the bystander training as part of my day job to help support her and, help her think about ways that she could engage in self-care. And so I think it's those sorts of things, both in a professional capacity as well as personally. I continue to see how important the 5Ds are, and I think will continue to be. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Cristina. And then I could, I think for us at Advancing Justice Chicago, our mission is to build power through collective advocacy and organizing to achieve racial equity. So bystander intervention training is so important in our anti-hate work. And I also want to just recognize that these issues, like while it's been highlighted, like the anti-Asian hate and violence, but they're not new, and it is connected, to a deeper history of not only anti-Asian communities, but collectively in the US against marginalized and minoritized communities. So I think this is something where within our communities, we're seeing folks participate in the training, but also there, with all of the uprisings since 2020, I think this is a time where collectively and folks are being allies and coming together to take this. So that is where it plays out for us. And we've, I think since October of 2020, have trained 19,000 participants in the Midwest. So, and that's continuously happening. So yeah, very thankful for our partnership with Right to be able to use these 5Ds.
And so you started to speak a little bit about allyship. And so that takes me to our next question, which essentially is, bystander intervention is just one form of allyship. And so, as we think about this work that we do, are there any folks in your life who you think embody what it means to be a good ally? And I will popcorn that one over. How about we start off with you, Cristina?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Jorge. It kind of got me thinking about what exactly is it that makes someone a good ally, just, writ large. And I think for me, what comes to mind is someone who's sort of able to really step outside of their own personal lived experience and actually think about the impact of, shall we say, experiencing public spaces or the world around you through the lived experiences or eyes of someone else, and to actually then even take it a step further and actually, advocate for that person or, help them, grab onto power in a way that might be difficult or perhaps feel challenging. And I think someone that really comes to mind for me is actually my own mother. She's what I almost think of her as someone who's overly empathetic. She really wants to take on the worries and concerns of others and support them however she can, and she'll do that at the expense of her own sleep, her own well-being. I'm always telling her not to take it all on. But I think she really, to me, embodies someone who wants to take being an ally to the next level, really no matter what the cost might be to herself. And so definitely someone that's been a role model for me all my life in that regard.
Thank you for sharing that, Cristina. That you said mom, and I was like, yeah, my mama too. I was like, what is it about? It's our ancestors, right? Like our ancestors who passed that on to our elders who are now passing that on, and then it's our job to like keep taking that forward of taking care of each other. Anybody else want to share? Or Cristina, you want to pop it over to someone?
Sure, I'll send it over to Sufyan.
Thank you, Cristina. What comes to mind for me is right when the travel ban started back in 2017, we had groups like the Japanese American community, the LGBTQ community reach out to us and say, hey, our communities were locked up. Our communities have been fighting for our rights in this country. We got your back. And that really resonated in me because it just shows me the importance for us as communities, as well as me individually, to support those that are facing injustice and hate, and to use the resources, skills, privilege that I have to make sure that they are seen and heard and not feeling alone. So it was really refreshing for our community to see these others come out and be like, we got your back. And now I have to remind my own communities at times that, hey, these other communities are struggling also. We got to get their back. And I'll pass it back over to Marita.
Thanks. Yeah, my response might seem a little bit abstract, but I really am so grateful to the many civil rights organizations that we work with on a regular basis, including our partners through the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. I am so grateful for their knowledge, expertise, and the support that we all give to one another. So, we're all involved in similar work. Yes, we back each other up on advocacy and our policy asks. But we're also friends, and we make the time to check in on one another, because sadly we all know what it feels like to have our communities under attack. So when something happens, we do reach out to one another, check in on one another, and it goes beyond this idea of do no harm. We actively engage in communication all the time on how we can coordinate, collaborate, and really do more to support the individual communities where we represent, but also our collective community.
Yeah, I think for us, similar. I mean, I think it's our partners, our coalition partners, working with CAIR-Chicago. I think it's important to look at all of these kind of communities that have been harassed throughout time, and like us coming together. But something that just kind of resonated with us here in Chicago right after the murder in Atlanta last March, we had a couple chefs here from Chicago reach out to us, and they wanted to do something. And we ended up doing a campaign called Do Something. So like do something, but do something, and ended up working. And it was really kind of like led by these chefs across the country. And they were kind of tapping into their own networks to stand up against anti-Asian hate. And it was, allies, Asian owners, bar owners, restaurant owners. And we ended up raising like $50,000. But the more of the conversations that were happening was, I think allyship is so crucial, and like being able to use our different platforms to work together to like create change. And I think this is like anyone, any kind of identity that is going through this training is starting that kind of journey on becoming an ally. So I think, even just thankful for like every single person and all of our different partners that are doing this, because I do think like the more folks that keep taking this, like the more change is going to happen.
Thank you all so much for sharing that. I feel like I could listen to stories of amazing allies all day long. I want to talk about the 5Ds, though. We wrote a book about the 5Ds. You guys are out there hitting the streets, teaching the 5Ds, hitting the interwebs, teaching the 5Ds as well. So let's talk about it. So I want to just start off with a just quick show of hands. How many of you here have ever had a moment in your life where you felt like you didn't intervene because you had some concerns about intervening? Some concerns that might have been valid. Yeah, me too. All right, so here's the next question then. Now that you have learned and taught and learned what the 5Ds are, I want to go around and hear what your superpower is. So I'm going to start it off with Marita.
Okay. And this comes up during the trainings all the time. And my response is that before doing this work, I feel like my go-to would have been direct. I'm an attorney. I like to think I don't shy away from direct engagement, confrontation, etc. But after doing this training, I now embrace delay, because I feel like that's the one tactic that can always be used and should be used, right? Even if you're not able to respond in the moment, checking in and offering support after the fact, as we know, can go a long way towards mitigating the harm that someone experiences after facing harassment.
I love that. From direct to delay. Sangini, what about you?
So similar. I would say before, or like my initial like reaction would be direct. But that would be original superpower, direct. But I really think it is so nuanced. You know, after like doing the trainings, like it becomes so situational, where I have found myself being like, oh wait, maybe I don't want to be direct. Maybe I need to like delegate, depending on what the situation is. Which I kind of like. It's more, you know, we also call it like our spidey sense. So depending on what we end up seeing, and then I could pull from one or even using multiple of the D's to intervene.
I love it. I love it. How about Christine?
Yeah, I think before learning what the 5Ds were, I probably would have also thought direct had to be the way to go, or maybe delegate, and probably more with like a possible, you know, person of authority lens to it, or even maybe, you know, feeling like needing to involve someone who, you know, maybe knew what they were doing. I think before becoming more familiar with the right to be philosophy and like the 5Ds in general, there's this sense that like you can only know what to do if you like fully know what to do. But I think what's really great about the 5Ds is that it gets you comfortable with more of like a gray area and still feeling like you can make a difference, even if perhaps like every nuance of the situation is not clear, which it never can be, because these instances, I think, where you need to intervene, things do happen so fast. And you just have to make that sort of quick decision using the sort of spidey sense that Sangini was mentioning. So I think now I'm leaning definitely more towards delay these days, maybe pairing delay with something else that can happen while the incident is going on. Because as someone who has certainly experienced more harassment in the sort of microaggression or that sort of first section of spectrum of disrespect, there's definitely that like self-recrimination that happens afterwards, where I feel like having someone check on you, even if it has been some time since the actual incident, can really make a huge difference, as Marita was saying earlier.
Yes, absolutely. I'm with you. Thank you for that, Cristina. I, similar to a few of you, like really love delay, right? Marita, I really love delay. People are like, really, you're the bystander intervention lady? And I'm like, yeah, it's because I'm a big wimp and I'm big conflict averse wimp. And I just want to like check in on people and make sure they're okay. But you can love one of these Ds as hard as you want, and it's still not be the D that you need to use in that moment. Sufyan, what about you?
Great question. I resonate with so much with everything that everyone said. I think in my head, I always wanted to be the guy who could go there and be direct. But that's not the case. And what I'm finding is more of the distract and delegate. But my hands down superpower is the delay. I want to go check in on the person, see how they're doing, and most importantly, make sure that they have what they need moving forward, whether it be legal support, mental health support, a big hug, or just someone to sit next to. And I'm happy to be that person.
I love that. I love that. All right. So for the Ds that did not get as much love on this call, I'm going to get a little bit of love to distract. I want to say across all the trainings we do, that is everyone's favorite. It involves a lot of creativity. You can have a conversation with the person being harassed to really distract the person doing the harassing from what they're doing. Delegate, I feel like, gets a little bit of a bad rap. People are like, why am I going to tell somebody else to do what I can do myself? But delegate is the ultimate D for a community organizer, because it's about bringing in all your people, because together we are stronger than just one. And last but not least, on the unrepresented D's of this phone call, document. So document, if done right, can give so much power to the person being harassed, because it gives them the documentation they need to make the next move in their full power without anybody ever asking them, aren't you just being hypersensitive? Did that really happen? You must have misunderstood it, right? So lots of optionality here in terms of those D's. I think there's no kind of wrong way to go, but it's also really important to know what your superpower is. So lots of directs and delays in the room. And last question from me before I pass it back over to Jorge is, I'd love to hear from you all. Have you ever gotten to use one of these things in action? I won't call on you because I don't know who has a story, but if you have a story, can we hear it?
I'm happy to. We've been trying to incorporate actually a lot of some of these, especially the delay in our work. CAIR-Chicago received about 400 cases of anti-Muslim discrimination on an annual basis. And sometimes there's just cases that there's no legal recourse for us, but it's doing the follow-up and checking in with whomever is experiencing the hate or harassment. We're receiving huge amounts of school bullying cases. And sometimes these students who are contacting us, they feel so alone and isolated. So just working with my teams and empowering them just to, hey, check in with them, see how they are. Sometimes they just need a friend. And if we can play that role, I feel it just has a profound effect on these people's lives.
I love that. When I was just starting what was then known as Held Back, now known as Right to Be, I was like 25 years old. And we were at that point just this tiny little blog receiving stories of harassment. And I got a story in from a 16-year-old girl who had just been harassed, groped in public. And she wrote this long email about it as a submission to this little blog back in the day, 2006, and said, I have nowhere else to turn. I have no one else to tell. I can't tell my parents. They'll never let me outside again. The police don't care. My teachers don't care. My friends are going to think I'm a slut if I tell them. And it was that feeling of you are that safe space. Right? And you can be that safe space, and you don't need to have a blog or an organization behind you to be that safe space for somebody else. I think is so beautiful and important. Does anybody else have a story they want to share? Jorge, I'm going to get you to share your story, your bystander intervention story that happened right here in this building at work.
Yeah, it's actually in the book. So we're talking about superpowers, and so mine is direct. I say it all the time. It's just I'm naturally inclined to be super direct with folks. Is how I was raised. And so learning. I'm onboarding. It's my first month. I'm gonna go check the mail. And when I go check the mail, I hear there's an Asian woman in the mailroom saying, "Please leave me alone. Don't speak to me that way," or something along those lines. And so when I turn the corner, there's like an older white man just like cursing at this woman. And I remember asking her if everything was okay. She's like, "No, you won't leave me alone." And I'm like, "Sir, she's asked you to leave her alone. Like, she asked you to not talk to her. Don't speak to her that way." And so I thought, like, great, Jorge stepped in, saved the day. This man is done. Well, no. Then he started like swearing at me and like cursing at me and saying stuff. And at that time, I was still on my journey over here. But I was much earlier on in my journey, so I was much quicker to anger. And so I remember getting ready to like verbally spar with this man, and then I look down and I see this woman's face and she's terrified, and I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then I'm like, "You're at work and like you need to help this person. You are not gonna help them by getting into an argument in this tiny mailroom with this man." And so I quickly went and I got help. I went and got the building security to come. And I think the best feeling was a couple of weeks later, she actually came to the office to like thank me. what I do think about that story and something we overlook, that, you know, it also takes a lot of power in realizing when you're not the right person to do something, but still knowing that you can do something. So I have actually, even though I am a direct person, delegate has actually become my go-to these days, because I realize that, you know what, I may not be the person equipped to deal with this. I think also as a man of color, who a lot in my neighborhood, you know, I'm in Brooklyn, New York City, I see a lot of women, you know, experience harassment. And in those cases, I don't always feel comfortable being the one to approach them, because in some cases they're being harassed, you know, by men, and I don't want them to think that I'm going to try to harass them as well. And so thinking about how can I help this person in the best way. And sometimes that's like seeing somebody else on the street, like, hey, do you see that over there? What's going on over there? Right now, this dude just passed by and did this. I don't feel comfortable because I'm male presenting. I'm dude. So do you feel comfortable? And it's worked a few times. A couple of times people just like blow me off.
Thanks for that. I mean, I will say, so the bystander intervention story that Jorge told, we were there in the middle of a staff meeting when we get this like knock, knock, knock on the door, and I was like, who's that? Like, what do they want? And Jorge's like, oh, I know her, and goes over, and there is the woman who was in the mailroom, who came to thank Jorge for what he had done. And it was so beautiful, because so often as bystanders, you know, the person, rightfully so, is experiencing harassment. They are not like in, you know, don't have the time space to say thank you, because it's a moment of crisis. And she actually took the time to come and find us in the building. I think she probably had no idea where we were. She had to ask a few people to figure it out, knock on that door, and you could feel in her the energy and the weight of what Jorge had done. Like, it was so clear that Jorge intervening in that moment wasn't just about that moment. Like, that to her represented the possibility that there could always be somebody there who had her back and filled a gap, I think, for probably many times before that, you know, that maybe people hadn't been there for her, right? And I think that's part of the power of it, is it creates this like potential portal into a future that we certainly don't live in right now, but a future possibility where we can all take care of each other when this happens. So thank you all for sharing, Sufyan and Jorge. And Jorge, I'll pass it back to you for the next question.
Just talking, and many of you have shared, you know, shared your stories, that this work is personal to us. I know for me, it's extremely personal. I've lived my entire life as Afro Latino. I say fat because I own it, fat male, and not, you know. And then when I was 25, as a queer fat male, and so it's not always easy, right? We know wearing some of our identities put us at increased risk to experience harm, folks. You know, folks. So we know the reason we're good bystanders. We come to this work is because we know what harassment feels like. And so if y'all feel comfortable sharing, I'd like to ask, and I won't choose anyone because I want folks to feel comfortable in sharing your own story. Has there ever been a time where you were being harassed and no one stepped in to support you? And, you know, and if so, like, how did you manage that trauma? What helped you keep going?
I could share a personal story. So this was probably about, it was really like maybe like 10 years ago, but I was on the train here in Chicago, and, you know, I sit down. I think I was like downtown, heading north, but I sit down, and then a woman comes on a couple stops later, comes on and starts mumbling stuff to herself, looks at me, and just starts verbally harassing me. You know, first it's, you like, why are you that color? Like, you're so dirty. Did your mother didn't wash you today? And kept going. And I just, looked down, looked out the window, and we pass another stop. People exit out, people are coming in. And this continues for probably like 2 or 3 stops. And, and this is like, just, people are around and nobody was saying anything. And I just like, in my head at that moment, I was like, I'm just not going to engage, but she would not stop. And then it was about 4 or 5 stops later. So this was kind of a moment of being on the train for, let's say, like 20 minutes and somebody's consistently harassing me. And then about 4 or 5 stops later, there was actually a gentleman that, was in his like business suit, came on, and he used he used direct, and he ended up saying like, hey, leave her alone. And it was only until that moment that somebody intervened that other people started to kind of come together and say like, yeah, leave her alone. And, like somebody at one point was like, come here, like to like actually go to the other like side. And like that importance. And, I didn't realize that obviously like these are the 5 Ds that were happening until we partnered with Right to Be and going through like the bystander intervention training myself, and it all started coming back. And I was like, wow, that is what happened. But it wasn't the first time that something like that has happened. And Jorge, like you were saying, you live in Brooklyn, I think we see these things like all of the time. I'm Indian American, but still, we're coming up to like 21 years later after 9/11. Folks also just kind of saying, go back to your country, so like seeing that impact even 21 years later, and this is things that, so I think, I saw the kind of shift that ended up happening when no one intervened, and me just being like siloed and isolated and alone and just wanting to like get off the train. But she was in my way too. So it's like, I couldn't really pass her until someone was just like, come here, to then how it felt when folks intervened. But it took one person to intervene for like 6 people then to like actually get her off of the train, to like say you got to get off. And then, I think the how to deal with this, I think that exactly what you said. I think this is why I'm in the work that I'm in. I think this is why I think this specific work is like so important. And now I am like just way more aware of when I'm like walking, whether it's not even like I'm at work, but like any moment, like I know, I guess that other kind of superpower, like I'm just way more aware of my surroundings to see how can I help folks. So that is my story.
Thank you for sharing. I'll just hold a few more seconds for some space if folks want to share, but don't feel forced.
I can share just real briefly. Growing up, English wasn't my first language. A lot of school bullying cases, just making fun of. I would take Indian food to school, and my parents would come in traditional Indian outfits to parent-teacher conferences and school activities. But I always just thought it was a rite of passage, or this is what I was supposed to do. And I don't think I realized the effect that had on me until a much later stage. And it was hard. It's just seeing that this constant othering of me and people like me and from my communities. And I think it's one of the motivating factors for me to do the work that I do and partner with great organizations like yours to do this great trainings that we've been doing.
Thank you, Sufyan.
I think for me, it's, I thankfully haven't experienced harassment that's really like risen to the level of a physical threat. And I share this when I do my intro for our trainings, but there's so many microaggressions that I've like lost track of all of them over time, or like just like, mere verbal harassment. And so there's definitely incidents that have really stayed with me over the years. And I can think of one in particular. I was like a maybe first or second year associate at the firm that I worked at almost right after law school. And I was on a phone call with an attorney about a case where they represented our client on a different but related case. And we'd only emailed before. This was the first time we'd actually talked on the phone. It's like totally normal conversation for like 10 minutes. And then he suddenly switched to talking to me in broken Korean. And when I like interjected and tried to stop him, I was like, oh, I speak English, like I have been for the last 10 minutes. Also, I'm not Korean. And then he decided that he should switch to broken Chinese. And he wanted me to tell him if he was pronouncing different words correctly. And I just like didn't know how to get him to stop. And like eventually he did. And we hung up the phone. And I just remember like crying in my office and not knowing like who to tell at the firm or like how to get support. Of course, like many large law firms, the office was, very, very white and, generally very male. And as someone who was really new to the firm, I didn't really know who to even tell about my experience or like how to process what had happened. And so I really feel like bystander intervention is so important to even just incidents like that don't feel like they don't really threaten you physically or your like, your safety in like a physical way. But I think just raising awareness of what harassment can look like. Again, I love the spectrum of disrespect because I really feel like it provides a big picture of all that can happen and all that can kind of chip away at a person of color or marginalized person, like what Sufyan was sharing about his experiences growing up. That they really can take a lot away from someone, and to sort of basically get folks more aware of what they can do to prevent that kind of casual racism from proliferating, I think is just so important. And I think that's why doing this training has been so important to me, and really sort of the broader foundation and like context setting that I think that our training curriculum does a really great job of, even before we get into what the 5Ds are exactly.
Thank you, Cristina.
Thank you all. I will chime in here. And it kind of took this training for me to recognize that this experience that I'm going to share is something that I would even label as harassment. And it came about through, thinking about the part of the training where we talk about the impacts of harassment, right? We have all faced microaggressions. And as I also shared during the training, for me, these experiences began really early. And they have a lasting impact, like Sufyan shared. I'm a first-generation immigrant. I grew up speaking a mix of Tagalog and English. I didn't recognize that my language was a combination of two different languages until I started school. And I got teased for using words that the other kids didn't understand. So I decided then and there that I was only going to speak English. And as a result, I have lost my ability to speak my native tongue. No one should have to make choices like this, much less when they're only 5 or 6 years old. And I share this because it would have been helpful then to have someone tell me that I didn't need to conform or assimilate, that I should be proud of and hold on to my language skills. And that's the key takeaway for me, is it's easy to say to be proud of what makes you unique and different. But oftentimes, some of us need support to really believe and internalize that, right? Along with the understanding that no one deserves to be harassed, that we all deserve to be treated with respect. And I feel like that is one of the critical messages of these trainings, and why I'm so proud to be part of this work with all of you.
Thank you, Marita.
Thank you all for sharing those stories. I think, we're sort of taught growing up that it's like the price we have to pay for being a person of color, or being queer, or being a woman, and and I think we all go through our own processes, and we all are actively still going through our own processes of really uncovering the fact that we should get to be exactly who we are wherever we are, and that is not a privilege. It is a right that we have as humans, but a right that we are not afforded so often. I think over the past few years, particularly over the past 5 years, we've seen surges in conversations about anti-Muslim hate, especially after the election of Trump in 2017. 2016, we saw surges in conversations about Black Lives Matter. We've seen surges in conversations about Me Too, about Stop AAPI Hate. And yet the reality through all these surges in conversations and all of these movement moments is that the hate happens, whether people are talking about it or not. That it's not just something that used to happen to certain communities, and now those communities are doing great, right? And I think that's the distortion of the media, the distortion of the movement moments. And so what I want to hear from you all is what is the future of this movement? What is the future of this work to end hate, to end harassment? We know where it is. We've ridden these waves together, right? But what does it look like in 5 years and in 10 years? How do we not just have maybe better conversations about it, but also really meaningfully start to chip away at it? So Marita, I'll start off with you on that one.
I'm drawing from my lessons I have learned from you all, and what's in the book is I really think this is all of us need to be greater contributors to this effort of changing our culture, right? Like we say it in the training all the time, intervention doesn't have to be a big heroic act, but the sort of daily actions, everyday interventions to help people feel cared for and to help people understand that harassment and disrespect are not acceptable, right? I echo Cristina. I think the spectrum of disrespect is a great tool because we want people to intervene in all forms of disrespect, not just the more extreme forms of harassment. So, yeah, we're all on this journey together. I love that we're bringing more people into it with us, through the trainings, now through your book. So yeah, that's going to be my answer is we all need to be actively engaged in changing our culture to one where we are ending harassment and making it clear that disrespect is not okay.
I love that. I think a lot too of how each of these moments have pulled different people and attracted different people into the space. Maybe you're not Asian identified or Muslim identified, but you came in for, the work to address anti-Muslim hate because you had a friend, right? And then you stayed for the work to address anti-Asian hate because it was important, right? And I love that kind of snowball effect of like, don't just come in for one community, like let's come in for all of them. Cristina, what are you thinking here?
I'm really thinking about how much I appreciate the parallels that are drawn in our anti-Asian specific training that we do with you all. And by that, I mean the sort of very overt parallels right off the bat regarding anti-Blackness and Black Lives Matter. And then further on the curriculum, reminding folks that, hey, Asian doesn't just mean East Asian. We're also talking about post 9/11 impacts on our South Asian and South Asian appearing community members as well. And so I think really as sort of building off of what Marita was sharing, I think it's about coalition building. I think it's about having folks recognize a lot of the commonality of the experiences that we've all been through that, render bystander intervention something that is so important and so necessary. And I think it's through having folks identify those commonalities that we begin to continue to build the bridges that we need so that hopefully one day we actually don't need bystander intervention anymore, will be rendered obsolete. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, there's so harassment impacts identities in so many different ways, and I think to your point about commonality, there's different manifestations of it, whether it's racism or sexism or homophobia, right? But it is this core root cause of hate. And when we were writing the book, the book talks about identities that neither Jorge nor I hold. And we felt comfortable talking about those things because of our partners, because we knew we could get our partners to read it and give us the real skinny on if we'd done it right or not. But we'd also felt called to do it because no two people are going to hold every single marginalized identity, and yet still we have to do the work. Even if doing the work puts us at risk of getting it wrong, right? We have to try anyway. And there's so many similarities, I think, in terms of the way that hate is experienced, and at the same time, so many differences too. So I appreciate that comment, Cristina. Sufyan, where are you sitting with this? What's the future of the movement to end harassment?
The future of the movement. Something I am always pleasantly surprised to hear whenever we're doing these trainings is how attendees don't realize how big of an issue it is, right? That how many communities are still facing hate or harassment. Maybe it's because we all live in silos. Maybe it's because we're just not grasping how our privilege is very different than others is. And so I think what I would love to see is just more people being attuned to the realities that are out there and how different people are struggling and facing a lot of these issues. And the second is that what we're teaching, what the lessons we're sharing can be used in any sort of situation where they're seeing these things. So keep spreading that message and that word, and then hopefully empowering others to take it a step further and continuing with policy changes, legislative advocacy, having our government leaders and those in more positions of power and authority to really come out and say, hey, this is not acceptable. This is not okay. And we're going to make sure that we find solutions to it in a systemic ways, that we can start really curbing this and addressing some of the trauma and the experiences that these communities have been facing.
I'm with you. And let's get them young. Let's get this stuff into schools, so that we're not just out here trying to survive until we happen upon a free training in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Like, let's learn about it when we're 5 and considering whether or not we want to give up our mother tongue, as Marita did. Sangini, what about you? What is the future of the movement for you? What are you seeing in your crystal ball?
I think you guys touched on a bunch of these, but I do really think a deep investment on violence prevention. And I think, ways that we are doing that is within education, getting it to youth, having youth take the bystander intervention training program, teaching our histories in our classrooms, in our narratives, and for folks knowing, to combat the belief of the model minority myth that this is happening to Asians, South Asians. And, to Sufyan's point, yes, like unlearning these systems of racism and the policy change. I think that is like a key piece in where this next frontier is going. I think it has to kind of come in from that education piece, but then really at all of our different levels, like create that policy change.
All right. It's a beautiful future. I think we can do it. I think we got this. Yeah. We're well on our way.
Yeah. Yes, we are. And so we are getting ready to come up on our time together today. But before we head out, I have a closing question. And so if we can, I'll start with Marita. We can go around. Who do you most want to read this book and why?
Apologies if this is a cop-out, but I want everyone to read this book. I really do. I think there's so much that we can all learn from it. And, I recognize that a 1-hour online training isn't going to be accessible for everyone. We've had books forever. Read the book.
Feel that. How about you, Sufyan?
I would say my parents and some of their friends. I feel sometimes, especially with older immigrants in my communities that I work with, there's just such a hesitancy to ally and support, and a lot of the even unlearning that needs to be done. And I would just love for them to see the type of work that I do hands-on, as well as just little things that they could do to learn a little bit and support those that are experiencing hate or harassment around us.
I know. It's like making sure my mom, like, Mom, make sure you read this thing a few times, all right? And spread it, share it with folks. What about you, Sangini?
On the flip side, I'm gonna go with my little nieces and nephews. My nieces, I have a 16-year-old niece, I have a 9-year-old niece. I think my 6-year-old twin nephew's maybe too young to read this, but I want them to read this. I think they are our future, so I want them to read this. And I think I'm inspired by my 16-year-old niece. I was not having these conversations when I was 16. I was not in this space. So I think, for them to read it, and then for them to continue to like challenge their parents and challenge their grandparents. And, so yeah, I would say for youth to read this, our young adults.
And that leaves us with Cristina.
Yeah, I was, well, first I wanted to share, because we've been doing bystander trainings in different Asian languages since last fall. My parents actually recently participated in one of our Mandarin language trainings that was in the evening that they were able to attend. And it was pretty mind-boggling to see them like understand exactly what I've been trying to describe to them as like, what is bystander intervention? And so that was really fun. And so I feel like similar to Sufyan, it would be great if my parents could take a peek at the book. And certainly I think within my own family, more broadly, as well as loved ones, don't want to call anyone out, but there's definitely kind of, shall we say, an array of where people may lie on the political spectrum. So I think some folks could definitely benefit from a deeper dive into many of the concepts that we touch upon in bystander intervention, as well as the book itself. So would love it if they would take the time as well.
We all know somebody who needs this book. And so, I mean, in that spirit, we really want you to go out there, find that person who needs the book, and get them a copy. There's we have some holidays coming up. Just 'cause I want you to be safe. Just 'cause I want you to be an amazing ally. And so I'm grateful for y'all spending time with us today and having this conversation. I think for me, it was a great way to kind of close out my day.
And for partnering with us so many years ago, and continuing those partnerships, and spreading the word about bystander intervention, because nobody should have to be alone. You guys are phenomenal partners, phenomenal, beautiful humans. And I want to thank you for just so generously and openly sharing not just your organizations, but really your full selves with us today. Thanks, everyone.